Well, I don't disagree with that. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is the medical system as it is right now. Yes, they are free to seek a second opinion. However, if they're on Medi-Cal and they are assigned a primary physician, they will be paying out of pocket to see a second physician. They are not allowed to go to a different physician. In addition, I've worked almost a decade in federally qualified health clinics, and the way they work, vaccination rates are sort of required to be extremely high, or the physician is disciplined on their performance review. In addition, they can lose insurance contracts. So there's a huge amount of pressure on a doctor to not write a medical exemption. I've actually witnessed a physician who was pressured by the boss not to write one, and they buckled and did not. And so that child then has to go outside and seek a second opinion. I don't think that's necessarily fair, but that is our system as it exists. When in doubt, the MD, the doctor, will fall back on the CDC vaccination contraindication list so that nobody can call them out. In addition, like I said before, in West Virginia, they did have a doctor give their opinion written against vaccinating a child, and it went to court, and public health, the Department of Public Health overrode them.
Thank you. Well, these are helpful insights. I would ask, you referenced the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. Do you question their data as to the difference between adverse reactions versus fatalities for non-vaccinated who contract certain diseases?
I think they probably underreport both, because you have to have very fair proof that a person died of a disease and very fair proof that a person died of a vaccine. And sometimes the proof is a little tough.
But I appreciate that. The spectrum, though, in terms of the ratios that are shared, 1 in a million suffer an allergic or adverse reaction, whereas with tetanus, 1 in 10 who contract tetanus, it's fatal. Do you disagree with that? I
do not disagree with that. I think the numbers of people who have died from measles, let's say, is higher than those who have died from the MMR vaccine. I think some of the injuries that they have been talking about are subtle, and I think a lot of them are going to come to light in the future as we start really examining the components of the vaccines, the combinations we're doing right now. They've never been studied, the combinations, none of them.
Yeah, one of the things that we've learned from the testimony, the spectrum of physicians, chiropractors, other healthcare providers, if there is more to be learned in this area, it's clearly there's a community that's committed to learning, and it's within the medical community as well. And I hope that would inform the application of the medical exemption in a manner that's informed and science-based, which I think everyone would agree is the goal. Madam Chair, in the interest of time, you've been generous, affording all perspectives as well as members. I will be supporting the bill today. I remain interested in support of the author's interest in continuing to improve the bill, to be sensitive to the concerns that we've heard. For me, I feel our public trust, as I've said before, if it were just a matter of personal choice, I don't think we would be here today. But it's when that personal choice may have an adverse impact on somebody else's child that forces us to try to make the decision that is in the best interest of our broad community. So that's where I land on this, and again, appreciate everybody's sincerity and obvious commitment to what's in the best interest of their children. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to respond, Dr. Pan? I noticed to the question about the medical issue.
I would just, first of all, as I think I said in the introduction, our bill is supported by every major medical organization, ranging from the CMA to the American Academy of Pediatrics, public health officers, and so forth. Also, there's a statement said that no one has studied. Actually, the Institute of Medicine, and I know I said this in the introduction, if I can just repeat it again, concluded that there's no evidence of major safety concerns associated with adherence to the childhood immunization schedule. So it has been studied. It is considered safe.
Senator Hertzberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Come on here. I apologize. The committee schedule is a little bit
Crazy.
taxing, and thank you so very much, members. I apologize. But I wanted to just bring to your attention two issues that have caught my attention, and I think you've dealt with them. I just consulted with the chair on this in talking to folks who've expressed their views. And the first is this notion that you can get a medical exemption. And I think it's answered by the second, so I'll just preface it with that. Because, you know, this idea that everybody just has a doctor, Dr. Pan, is not really real. Not everybody has access to this stuff. You can't just go and how much testimony have we heard about people getting their medical care in emergency rooms? It's not like you have a normal, regular physicians. We have all this discussion of Obamacare where people have been signed up but they don't have access because we don't have the necessary reimbursement rates. So, you know, despite this notion of people having the opportunity for medical exemption, A, you have a chilling effect because most doctors don't want to sign. I think that's accurate. And two, it's not every people without means have the ability to go hunt down a medical exemption. That being said, I think the second point, if I understand, I want to get clarification, handles it. Because if I understand the chair's amendment here, it really solves the underlying architecture of the problem of eliminating the personal belief. Because the second point that grabbed my attention from folks who are advocating is this open-ended notion that there's a perverse incentive for every drug company to sell across California every kind of drug that they want to sell, right? But if I understand and I want to make sure I understand this on this measure, that your amendment basically says that we have a certain list now, that's going to be the list, and that you have a personal exemption for anything beyond that list, unless the legislature so otherwise acts. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, in essence, what you've now done, is this fair to say? You've defined the issue down to the current existing, and how many are those? 10. Right, that's what I thought. I want to make a mistake. 10. So the issue here is that what really is going on in this bill is that except with regard to those 10 vaccinations that people are getting now, kids are getting now as they go to school, those are the only issues before this committee. And and we do not have this long, open-ended issue and these perverse incentives. Is that fair?
Right.
Okay. So it seems to me that that you really dramatically narrowed the notion of personal exemption in the larger issue that Senator Monning talked about, the public good and the welfare against the power of the individual. And I really applaud you and your team for doing that, and I think it's a great, unbelievably important addition to the bill. It fundamentally changes the dynamic in my judgment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg. Senator Wieckowski?
I guess, Professor Allen, I'm looking for a comment. In the section, I mean, I appreciate some people, the analysis goes through the police power of the state under Jacobson 110 years ago, that an adult just doesn't get to say, I don't want to be vaccinated. That the police power, the state has the absolute authority to force that person to get the vaccination. And I see in the analysis that they indicate that Professor Chemerinsky down south may believe that the state actually, we sort of undervalue our power. And when we get into the state's inherent parent power, I think in parents patriae, is that the analysis points out what Crowley and Ms. Crowley, is that we have a responsibility, the state, the police power, if we believe that children are being harmed, that we go into this domain of family rights, which are not absolute. And I guess my question to you is that maybe Professor Chemerinsky's not here, but the others have said that maybe we're not going far enough. We're not going far enough, that you've created some balancing tests, at least to try to narrowly tailor these 10 vaccines or these 10 elements that you're addressing in the bill. Professor, can you comment?
Ultimately, not only, there's a balancing test here in general, right? So we're trying to figure out, the state does have a compelling interest. We've discussed that. We've discussed the science. Of course, part of the question is that the state doesn't need to have vaccination rates at 100%. If you hear the science, it needs to just be It needs to be a little under 100%, but it doesn't have to be at 100%. So in the spirit of not trying to, understanding the rights issues associated and making sure that we're keeping with the spirit of trying to be least restrictive, we're not going further. And ultimately, our interest isn't just generally boosting the rates and preventing another outbreak. That's the compelling state interest here. And that's what the courts grant us the power to do that. But we are trying to be judicious about this is not a forced vaccine, this is not a mandated vaccine bill. I understand there are folks who feel as though it's gone too far. I mean, most of the people you heard on the opposition certainly think this bill is going too far. I understand that. There are others who actually do agree that there are some members of the legislature who are upset about some of the amendments that we've already taken because they think that it's weakening the bill. We think that ultimately this strikes a good balance between the broad public health concerns that are within the purview of the state with the rights issues that have been raised throughout the hearing.
And actually, doesn't it just require that we're reasonable? Isn't it just some reasonable nexus that we show, that you as the authors show for the?
Yes, there are debates about that, but I would argue yes. That's the only standard we need to meet. But I actually would argue that we've met the standard at multiple levels.
And I think, given the argument that education is a fundamental right in California, that we need to show a compelling state interest, and I think that has been shown. That's when we talk about what some of the language is that the U.S. Supreme Court has already identified is that there is the right of the public to be protected, and that in certain circumstances is greater than the individual rights, and in fact, they do not necessarily trump public health, and that, in fact, in the instances here, some of us are old enough to remember pre-vaccine days, and polio, one of particular anxiety, and you mentioned that your dad, which means he's probably of my generation, which has me a little, concerned here that my colleague is young enough to be my son, but at any rate, we don't want to go there. But the point is that vaccines have proven to be very effective in reducing, as you indicated, serious illness. There are people of my generation who had measles who became deaf. Mumps was a disease that could cause young boys to become sterile, even at a young age. So these were serious problems, and there has, I don't believe, been a case yet that says that the state's right to protect, and responsibility, actually, to protect public safety and health is subjugated to the right of the individual. And when you think of things like when it comes to transfusions for children, when it comes to car seats, clearly the state does have that right, and I think here, as Senator Hertzberg indicated, this isn't unlimited. This is dealing with what we have now, that we see the more we reduce that herd mentality or what have you, the herd concept, immunity rather, that we are endangering public health and that we do have the right. Now, if there is subsequently indication from all of the more respected health providers and agencies that there is damage associated with these greater than the public health, then certainly I'm sure we'll hear about that, and I suspect we'll hear about that from those of you here today. But at this point, I think that the data is overwhelming in that, but we don't want to misuse that power, and so I think that this bill does narrow it, and I want to thank you for your efforts to try to deal with the concerns of the parents here. Absolutely reasonable issues have been raised, but I think that it is dealt with. And so before I ask you to close, Senator Anderson, if you had any thoughts.
I was a little worried where you were going with that without calling me yet. So I
would never do such a thing, Senator.
I know. So we heard a lot of witnesses say that the sibling had a reaction, the parent had a reaction, someone in their family had a reaction. Then they went to their doc, and the doc said, well, that doesn't matter. We're still going to, we're not going to write you a personal exemption. So I don't know, is that good medicine or is that bad medicine? And perhaps we could have the two docs, or if anybody else is qualified to speak to that, I'd be very interested to know, because my concern is allergies and other things tend to run in families. I'm not a doctor, so I may be wrong, but it certainly does in my family. And if there's a strong reaction for one sibling or one member of the family, and we can't, I forgot which doctor answered this for me earlier, or said it earlier for someone else, that there's nothing that we can do to test them to know before we administer the vaccine. It seems to me that seems to be a pretty high risk factor, and if you wouldn't mind responding to that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's important to evaluate each individual reaction on its own. And so if somebody has a if somebody comes to me and they say that a family member, a sibling, a parent had a reaction, I want to try to figure out, make sense of that, and what's the reason for that, and what's the cause of that, and what's the association. If I can't figure a medical reason for that, if I'm not sure it's related to the vaccine itself, it doesn't make sense to me to give a medical exemption for that. If I can figure out a reason for that, and I think that their child is now at risk, then I want to get to the bottom of that for that child, and I want to delay vaccination until I can. And if a medical exemption is due, then I would want to give it. I'd be foolish not to give them a medical exemption if I thought that the vaccine was going to cause them harm. I'm coming from a place where I'm assuming that both the parent and the physician want what's best for the child. So I would not want a child vaccinated if I thought that they were going to have a bad reaction.
And how would you screen for that?
It would depend on the individual. So that's where I think Dr. Pan was talking about how it's medical judgment, and it depends on the specific circumstances.
And what's the process for that?
It would be gaining a history, talking to the parent, asking them about that, trying to think about how that makes sense related to that vaccine.
So I am a layperson, so could you break that down for me, because this is a very serious issue. So being specific and to the point, I think is really important. I think that when you're looking at this and you're screening, you've just been told that perhaps their twin or perhaps another sibling had a strong reaction, maybe a fatal reaction, somewhere in that continuum. So what types of questions as a parent would you be asking me about my child if that was my child?
So for example, I can tell you a patient that I saw who had a severe immune deficiency, severe combined immune deficiency syndrome. And their sibling had the same thing. It's a genetic disorder. And when they had a history of severe infections, and when they got a vaccine, they had the vaccine, it was a live vaccine, it multiplied more than they would want it to. And so that was a bad reaction to that vaccine. And then when I saw that child, the second child, I would want to make sure that that child does not have severe combined immune deficiency syndrome before I gave them that type of vaccine, and I can test for that.
Okay, so that's one of those things that we can test for, but is it ever possible for a child to have a very strong reaction, a very negative reaction, and they don't have that? Are there other symptoms that that you can determine a cause and effect, or is there some randomness to this where you have there's no reason to believe that this child's going to have a reaction, yet they do?
I agree with both those statements. Yes, that in some cases there is cause and effect, and in some cases there's a randomness to it. Yes.
Okay, so in the case of the randomness, and you had a parent, and I'm that parent, and one of my children have a very strong reaction because of the randomness, is your judgment that my other children should or should not receive, and are there additional questions and other filters that you would use?
I would do my very best to try to get at the bottom of trying to sort out why the reaction occurred, and if I could not figure that out, and if I was really convinced that it was random, then I would talk with that parent and say, listen, with that first child it was random, but I do believe that the benefits of vaccination outweigh the theoretical risks with your second child.
And when you're facing that parent who has gone through that turmoil, and they say, gosh, we don't agree with you, at that point, do you continue on and say, I know better? And I don't care what risk it is to your family. We have some folks who said they had 2 children who went through it. So how many children do you have to punish in my family before enough is enough?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I know better.
Whoa, wait a
and-
second. Can I interject here? That's why the first question I asked was, what does it mean to be vaccine injured? It's potentially a spectrum of things, of having a kind of a bad reaction where you might have a minor response versus a major. So that's the problem with assuming that people today who had 2 vaccine-injured children had 2 children who had serious, we're making assumptions here that I don't think we can necessarily make.
Well, whether it's serious or not, when you have 2 and the doctor has admitted that it's random and he can't make a cause-effect, I'm sorry, it doesn't happen in everybody's family with 2 children. I suspect that's fairly rare. And I suspect it's probably fairly rare, according to the testimony earlier, that there's a reaction at all. But yet, when that family, and it's a rare occasion, runs into that circumstance and their first child goes through it, it's the medical opinion that that's just not a high enough bar, and that we should go ahead and expose a second child. I think that this is a very dangerous road and that we're gambling on. And I think that is, this is why I think so many parents are upset that here you are, not having to take care of that child for the rest of their life, making decisions for them when we know it's a very slim risk, but a risk all the same. And, I'm shifting gears because I think that, Doctor, you've been very insightful. When you're looking at hepatitis B, so in your current bill, if my child has hepatitis B, can they attend school?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah. If my child has hepatitis B, may they attend school?
I believe they may attend school, yes.
But if they're not vaccinated for hepatitis B, can they attend school?
Well, if they have a medical exemption, then they will be able to attend school under this bill.
Now, is hepatitis B, can you transmit that? Can you, how does that work? Can one child pass it to another?
Hepatitis B, it is possible for a child to pass, well, basically, people with close contacts, so who spend a lot of time with each other, can pass hepatitis B from one to another.
Yeah, like on recess,
well,
gym
over
class,
a long period of time.
Wrestling class.
There's a small probability, yes.
So, but why aren't we concerned about those children? Why are we allowing those patient zeros to pierce the herd?
So I would argue that's one of the reasons why we require hepatitis B vaccination, because if those other children are vaccinated against hepatitis B, then their chance of getting hepatitis B from another child is extremely low.
Okay, so my child is a lesser citizen, and they have to go ahead and do all this, yet patient 0, they are allowed to sashay through the school and expose other children. The problem I have with this is this bill doesn't address patient 0, and if it addressed patient 0 in a more thoughtful and thorough way, then the secondary argument of getting to vaccinating every child out there, despite their religious beliefs, is there.
Unfortunately, first of all, we may not necessarily identify every patient 0, because there are a lot of patient 0s who are actually asymptomatic with the disease. Actually, I just want to make reference to the opposition testimony when they said, why should a vaccinated child, why should we worry about them? The problem is that depending on the disease, whether you want to talk about hepatitis B or measles, you are infectious with measles for 2 to 4 days before you develop any symptoms. That's 2 to 4 days of exposure in the school before anyone finds out that you're actually symptomatic and someone's actually going to do a workup and find out you have measles. So for that very reason, there's no way we can ensure that every child who's attending school is not potentially carrying a disease that they might have picked up. And unfortunately, unvaccinated children are at much, much higher risk. So if you want to talk about measles, they have if they're exposed, they have a 90% chance of catching the disease. If they are vaccinated, they have about 1% chance of catching the disease. So the problem is you have an unvaccinated child who is who has been exposed. They unknowingly have this disease for 2 to 4 days before they develop any symptoms. And in that time, other children in the school are being exposed, including other children who are unvaccinated, some whom are not vaccinated, not because they didn't want to get vaccinated, because they can't be vaccinated. And so now we have an outbreak going on in the school. We can repeat this discussion about polio. We can repeat this discussion about whooping cough. We can repeat this discussion about hepatitis B. This is really about protecting the children in the school. And that's why we want to get children vaccinated, to prevent these kinds of outbreaks and the spread of disease.
That's, I appreciate that. So when thinking of children below the age of 2, are they vaccinated?
Well, the recommendation is that, well, there's a schedule, some of which, many of which the vaccines are recommended before the age of 2, some of which are actually age of 4, so depending on the vaccine. But yes, they will be, if the parents follow the recommendation, then yes, they will at least receive some vaccines.
So on those vaccinations that are age 4, are we going to allow those children to go with their siblings to the schools? Are we going to allow them that same exposure? Are we going to allow them to go in there and potentially, because if they have it, they'd spread it just like any other child. So.
Well, if they receive their vaccines, then they are not. The main thing to try to remember is what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a safe environment in school. What you can't predict is that when patient 0 may show up in your school, right? What you can do is ensure that people who are at the school are vaccinated and therefore less likely, much, much less likely of actually catching the disease and then potentially transmitting it to others. That is what community immunity or herd immunity is about. Because you can't always predict someone who's walking to visit the school, whether it's a small child, a parent, or whatever else, who may be carrying a disease, at which point they may still be asymptomatic, and you won't know. But if you have a high enough immunity in the school, you know that that disease is unlikely to actually take hold. And that therefore people in the school are protected. And that's what's so important about maintaining a high enough immunization rate. It contains the outbreak. It keeps the disease from being able to spread beyond that initial patient to maybe at best, if there's a failure in the vaccine, maybe 1 or 2 other people, and then it stops. That's why this is so important. If you don't have that, it'll keep spreading and spreading and spreading. That's what we saw with the Disneyland outbreak, the measles outbreak that started in Disneyland. That's what we saw with the pertussis outbreak. That's why we're doing this bill.
So in the case of the Disney outbreak, was patient 0 a U.S. citizen?
Actually, we do not know exactly who patient 0 is, has not been identified. However, what we do know about the outbreak that began in Disneyland is that the immunization rates in the communities through which this disease spread is estimated somewhere between 50 and probably 84%. And I would also point out that this is not the first time measles has shown up in Disneyland. Disneyland is an international destination. People come from all over the world. There is still measles out in the world. However, in past exposures in Disneyland, what happened is that the disease showed up, and there were enough people were vaccinated, and it basically maybe affected 1 or 2 other people, and it stopped. And you didn't have to hear about it in the news because it wasn't spreading throughout our state. What's new is that this last outbreak didn't stop at Disneyland. It spread into other parts of California, into other parts of the United States, even into Canada and a couple of cases in Mexico. That is why we're doing this bill, because our herd immunity, our community immunity has been declining. And that's why the outbreak has been able to spread. If it wasn't for that, it was stopped at Disneyland, would not gone anywhere else. And maybe you would have had an article in the Orange County Register and that would have been it, because it didn't go anywhere else. Unfortunately, that is not the case.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think, excuse me, Senator, the focus of you weren't here when we started, so I just want to be clear that what we're talking about is not the issue of the health aspect was heard in the Health Committee, education was heard in education. Our job here is to deal with the constitutionality of whether or not the state has the authority to require immunization, whether or not we have created a reasonable alternative as a part of the compelling state interest that we have, and a reasonable alternative as part of the educational right with this legislation so that it will pass constitutional muster. We've been at this now for 3 hours, and going back to the Disneyland is not fruitful in moving this specific debate forward. So I'm going to, if you'd like to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask Senator Pan to close. We're going to move forward. We still have 10 more bills to address today.
Well, I do have one more question. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And I think it's more in line of what you're looking for.
Great.
So when we're looking at all of the vaccinations, many are created with aborted fetal cells. As a practicing Catholic and other practicing Catholics, we can't participate in that. Are there, on all these vaccinations, are there alternatives that are not created from aborted fetal cells?
So I would, first of all, vaccines are not made from aborted fetal cells. That unfortunately is a myth. There was, in the initial development of, I think, was it some couple of the vaccines, rubella vaccine, there was use of fetal tissue to develop the original rubella vaccination. But the continuing production of those vaccines do not involve aborted fetal cells, I believe. There was a quote from the Pope, who I believe is the leader of the Catholic Church, saying that he believes in, supports vaccination. We can certainly try to find the quote for you. I don't have it at hand. So I've not heard we have not received any notice or letter from the Catholic Church objecting to this bill.
In fact, I have the quote here. It was a document from the NCBC based on the findings from the Pontifical Academy for Life, which says that one reason why one is free to use the vaccine regardless of its historical association with abortion is that the risk, this is from the church itself, that the risk to public health if one chooses not to vaccinate outweighs the legitimate concern about the origins of the vaccine. This is especially important for parents who have a moral obligation to protect the life and health of their children and those around them.
Now, who's that from again?
This is the NCBC, which is the National Catholic Bishops' Council.
Yeah, that's just an advisory group. That's not the same as the Pope. And you are correct.
Senator Anderson, with due respect,
is the leader of the church.
Senator Anderson, we could provide you with the Pope's statement. I found this in 30 seconds.
You are the professor.
Yeah.
Let me, I'd like to hear from the one last witness, and then I'm finished. Thank you.
And what is the question to the one last witness?
About the vaccinations, how they are derived.
The fetal aspect.
Yes, so I checked the MMR insert last night from Merck. They do mention that there are in the contents and how it is made in the very beginning part, and I can get that for you if you like, that the MMR still says that on their insert that they do use descendants from the line, the cell line, that are still human fetal lung fibroblasts. So from the initial aborted fetuses that used historically, they are still using the cell lines that have been propagated and grown still in the laboratory to create the MMR.
Why don't we get clarification? I do recall reading that even the Pope had suggested that vaccinations were critically important, and I think that at this point we've had a thorough debate on the issue, and so at this point in time, Dr. Pan and Professor Allen, otherwise known as Senator Pan and Senator Allen, we'll give you a couple minutes to close, and then we are going to, I'll ask if there is a motion to move this bill.
I do move the bill.
Moved by Senator Leno. Gentlemen, if you would please close. Thank you all for a very robust and thorough debate.
Thank you, Senators, and thank you so much to everyone for coming and weighing in on the discussion. We continue to be committed to making sure that we really do strike this balance. Ultimately, our goal is trying to protect public health, increase vaccination rates, prevent the likelihood of an outbreak, protect kids, make sure that parents know that the government has taken reasonable steps to ensure that when they send their kids to school, they will not be exposed to dangerous communicable diseases that we have the tools to stop. That's what this is about. We are committed to working to make sure that the medical exemption ensures the freedom of professional practice for doctors. We're very concerned about making sure that we are respecting people's rights, but as we have discussed, and as is abundantly clear in the jurisprudence that we've examined today, the courts have made it very clear that it's perfectly constitutional for governments to require school kids to get vaccinated as long as there is a medical exemption. It's clear in the cases. It continues to be reaffirmed in the federal courts, and so we respectfully ask for an aye vote today.
Thank you very much. All debate having ceased. I'm sorry, Dr. Pan.
Again, I just want to thank the chair and the committee staff for working with us. Appreciate the discussion. And this bill is about parental rights. It's the rights of parents who have children who need protection from the rest of us in the community. I respectfully ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Madam Secretary, the motion is?
The motion is do pass as amended to Senate Appropriations Committee.
All right, do pass as amended to Senate Appropriations. In case that mic isn't working, please call the roll.
Jackson?
Aye.
Jackson, aye. Morlock? Anderson? No. Anderson, no. Hertzberg? Aye. Hertzberg, aye. Leno? Leno, aye. Monning? Monning, aye. Wachowski? Aye. Wachowski, aye. 5 to 1.
All right, that's 5-1. That bill is out. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you
so much,
everyone, for coming today. Thank you very much. Let's leave quietly, please. And appreciate your all being here and your attention to this. Let's clear the room, please.